Okay, so this is Cornwall, Connecticut on the 11th of July. Now it's about 9 o'clock or so. Dave Caldwell, Vietnam veteran. This is part two of the interview. We're going to talk mainly about the post-war experience, or his post-war experience. So I guess I'll just start with the broadest question of all. What was it like coming back after 2 years to the United
Oh, good
States?
question. Yeah, it's I think everybody's heard of the PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
and so the post traumatic stress part, the first three letters,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that's 100%.
Right.
There's no
Right.
one. It's just a whole other experience.
That's an excellent
and
point.
Just,
Yeah.
just totally different from here, and it's in the context, for me anyway, and I think I can speak for most of, you've done your year there or whatever amount of time, and all you've done is long to be back here.
Right.
You
Right.
couldn't wait to get home. So that was, but you left behind a completely different experience,
Mm-hmm.
and especially behavior wise,
Mm-hmm.
you're animals.
Right. Right.
It's just, you're just your language, everything. You're just disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
So to get back into civilization, everything is stressful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it gee, I can't sleep at night, or I can't, you
Mm-hmm.
have terrible. Then you put the D at the end, and it's a disorder.
Right.
And it's
Right.
it's our way of identifying that circumstance, and you can go
Mhm.
back through all the shell shock
Right,
and all
right.
the different expressions and everything. So I'm grateful that there's been, I think, a more specific identity put towards it.
Mhm.
All this being said, I had a great family that totally supported me.
Hmm.
There was never, we'd get mail typically when I was in the bush, every 3 days. There was never a mail call I didn't have mail.
Mhm.
So
Hmm.
I had great support from my family. I never encountered the oh, you baby killer and all
Mhm.
that sort of thing,
Right, right.
which I'm sure happened. I'm not saying it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It didn't happen to me.
Right.
And again, I was there very late in the war. The fact I never, used a weapon or
Mhm.
probably way more to the point for me personally was in reviewing all the decisions I was required to make. They all came out okay,
Mhm.
and that certainly would have been cause for, oh boy, I screwed that up.
Right,
That I
right.
didn't have that lingering over me.
Mhm.
Very grateful for.
Right. Right.
And now that I have the rest of my life to put this in perspective, the plain fact of the matter, the hardest life and death decisions
Mhm.
that I made in my life, I was 20 years old.
Right. Right.
That they're thrown at you,
Right.
and you just do the best you can.
Right.
But the life or death,
Yeah.
nonetheless.
Do you keep in contact with the
Oh.
people in your platoon or unit in years past? Or did you in years past? Maybe not. It's been 50 years, but like
Yeah,
in
no.
years past?
Initially, no.
Uh-huh.
It was like, I'm getting the heck out of here. I don't.
Right,
Been nice
yeah.
knowing you guys. Bye.
Right. Yeah.
You just got back to life.
Right,
And we I know in my case, it never came up. I never brought it up.
Yeah.
It was just is not a popular war.
Right.
So you just didn't.
I see.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
We stopped Hitler.
Right.
Rightfully so.
Right.
They had a great cause to
Right.
fight for, and they were our dads and uncles
Right. Right.
and all
right.
that sort of thing. They were right there. They were still there. So we had nothing like that to hang our
Mhm.
pride on. Though just due to the internet and all that sort of thing, I have gotten back in touch with
Oh.
any number of guys,
Mhm.
and we all seem to kind of email. We'll do a kind of a everybody gets in touch on Memorial Day.
Right. I
That
see.
seems to be
Yeah.
the gathering day, and so I have gotten back in touch with guys.
Mhm.
Probably most specifically would be my lieutenant, the platoon leader
Mhm.
I served under. He was a West Point guy, and he did his 20 years, and retired on the day he was
Right.
could
Right.
retire.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because politically we're on the two opposite ends but we shared way too much to let that
Right. Right.
get in the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
I have, but far more currently than
Than
back
back in the day.
I never,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And well, this is another general question, but it's something that I think is really important to ask of any veteran. How did it change you personally, your war experience? Now that you've had not quite 50 years, but 45 years to reflect on the war experience.
Well, that's you're asking me a personal question, and
Hmm.
so I'm the only one who could answer it.
Right.
That I'm sort of battling with the VA right now,
Oh, okay.
as far as just sort of see the whole PTSD thing,
Right. Right.
and you got to play their game of, well, you're not really qualified for that, but you could be for anxiety.
Hmm.
So it's like, what the whole point I'm trying to make with them
Hmm.
is, you plucked this at the time 19-year-old boy,
Right. Yeah.
did what you did with him, and threw him into that situation that I've now lived long enough to look back on, to just say, and excuse my French as they say, was fucked.
Yeah.
I mean, it was,
Right,
and
right.
now we have even more perspective to look at how these guys, they were guys who ran things. They didn't know what they were doing.
Right. Right.
I mean,
exactly.
our national security advisor today to Trump wrote a book
Right.
that's now the textbook
Right.
for McMaster, of how the leadership ineptly ran that war.
The military leadership in particular.
Totally.
Yeah, that's
It's
what he focuses on.
malpractice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
And so the point I'm sort of trying to make to them is, my whole concept of being a pawn
Mhm.
that's just shoved around the board.
Right.
It
Right.
just
I see.
it just seems that pawn just seems to be getting smaller and smaller, and you're more and more insignificant when you try to get into the system, and they're just like, oh, go away. Or if I came to them and go, well, here's my prostate cancer, which I don't have,
Mhm.
but if I did, and then I could go, that Agent Orange you exposed me to.
Right. Right.
Again, if I would have stayed home and everything, none of that would have happened.
Right. Right.
I was
right.
exposed. Oh, then you have a case, Dave.
Right,
Go,
right.
fine. Go
I
get
see.
your cancer,
Yeah.
and we'll look after you. Does that negate the what I would have liked to have thought would be the most joyful experience of my life,
Mhm.
with my twins being born, pretty much squashed by the fact of, are they going to be okay?
Right. Right.
Their
right.
whole gestation, everything I knew could have been affected by my exposure to that.
Right. Right.
What's my anxiety refund, please?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Of what you put. And again, I'm lucky enough to have lived that long, to experience these
Right.
things.
Right.
But it all gets back to that big question of why do we fight these wars and everything else?
Mhm.
Well, this is the ramifications of
Right.
it.
Right.
And
yeah.
I do actually have a story I know I haven't told you,
Mhm.
that just happened to me last summer. We had a fundraiser in the town south of us in Kent, for our local animal shelter, and the honorary chairwoman of the thing was Nancy Kissinger.
Oh,
And,
really?
And so we have the event, and I'm the auctioneer,
Uh-huh.
and I show up to this thing, and she brought Henry along. Well, you have to understand, I've mentally rehearsed this confrontation of if I ever met this guy, and there I am equipped with a microphone, and he's right there. Sadly, not the time or place for
Right,
me
right.
to give this speech
Yeah.
of, in 1969, you walked away from the Paris peace talks and everything.
Right. Right.
And then you walked back in 73, pretty much signed off for the same stuff.
Right.
You were on the table in 69, and
Right.
you got a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Right.
Well, I served from 70 to 72. You.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, we don't need to add any more expletives to this. But sincere, and you have to understand, I want him to be uncomfortable. I want him to
Right,
know
right.
this affected my life, your decision making, and I'm sorry, it's cowardly behavior that you were rewarded for.
Right,
I'm
right.
on to you, fella.
Right, yeah.
And I don't care how old you're and distinguished you are.
Right,
You
right.
need to know that
Yeah.
affected my life.
Right, right.
God
Yeah.
damn it.
Right.
So that it wasn't the time or place.
Right.
But talk about the wonderful life I get to live.
Mm-hmm.
I just by life circumstances, I drive people back and forth to the city or the airport and stuff. Anyway, sort of a new customer of mine is Robert McNeil of the McNeil-Lear Report.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
sure. Yes, of course.
So it's just a great guy,
Yeah.
and someone I grew up with who was sort of my Walter Cronkite.
Right,
Sort of,
yeah.
There's a trusted voice on PBS
Right.
you're always going to listen to, and we had this conversation. We were driving through Kent, and he immediately brought up Kissinger, a guy he had met several times, and
Really?
had,
Interesting.
interviewed and everything else. So I just told him that story I just told you guys. And so then I hear in a perfect baritone imitation of, well, you must understand we had many things to consider. So it's as close as I'm going to get to an apology from Henry Kissinger is Robin McNeil imitating Kissinger of what he might have said.
Right.
But anyway, that's the lingering effect for me.
Right.
Now, to be very honest, it doesn't dominate my thoughts. It isn't constantly. It isn't. I sleep at night and all that sort of thing. But all that being said, it's still all up there.
Right.
And doggone it, think twice before sending anybody else
Right,
off to
right.
do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
We really need to think long and hard.
Right.
So that's my message for
Right,
the future of.
right. And one last question.
Sure.
I want to ask you. It's sort of a general question, but I think it's an important question because we think of the baby boomers as such an important generation, and very divided
and very diverse, obviously. But as a Vietnam veteran, did you feel sort of out of touch with the baby boom experience as a whole, or not? Because the Vietnam War was a key part of the baby boomer aspect, but then a lot of baby boomers, the majority did not serve, and many were opposed to the war. So what's your relationship to your generation? How has the Vietnam War affected your relationship to your generation, if at all? I mean, maybe it's too general a question because a generation we're talking about millions and millions of people.
Yeah, that's a boy. This is the first time I've got to ponder that. I must say, for decades, I never, when it came to, let's just say you're at a party or so, and then it just kind of comes up, well, what did you do, kind of thing, and my basic answer was, well, they sent me over there to, and it's like, what did you do? I'm always, and you heard I went to Canada, I got the enemy. My stock answer to that was, you didn't miss a thing. You trust me, I was there. You didn't miss anything. I never considered it, whoa, yeah, I served and look how brave I was.
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with it. So hey, you did what you did, good for you. And it took probably the real flip of the switch for me was George W. Bush and kind of his cavalier of he got in the National Guard in Texas, a coveted, very difficult, clearly used his family name.
Right.
That happened, and when all was said and done, I think in the end he didn't even show up.
Right.
And
Exactly.
why he was not disqualified for that, I'll never know. But the fact that he slid through that, and Dan Quayle sort of did the same thing, and that neither one of them told what I thought was the truth. And if they were sitting right here, I could ask them come on, buddy, let's be honest. I was a kid. I went to my dad, said, what can I do? And he goes, this is what we're going to do, son. And they made the arrangements. That's how it was done. All right. That's the honest truth.
Yeah.
And for them not to concede, I am so grateful for that family I grew up in, and I clearly was privileged and probably, got favored treatment. That would be the truth, and that was the switch that got flipped of you know, all those neocons and everything.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
send those guys to Iraq and all that
Right,
sort of thing.
right.
Oh, when I'm Bill Crystal and it was my time to serve, you know, or no, I'm sorry, the ultimate was Dick Cheney.
Right,
You know,
right.
I had other priorities.
Right, right, right.
Didn't we all, Dick? that. Oh, but you know, none of these emotions hit me till, you know, I was in my 50s.
Right, right.
All those years before, you
Yeah.
did what you did. Good for you.
Right,
You
right,
didn't.
right.
You didn't miss anything.
Right,
And
right.
I'm by no means anything
Right.
special because, you know, I did what. And the fortunate thing that this is the price we paid, but I'm happy to have paid it. Of we are never ever gonna blame the soldier again.
Right,
Ever.
right,
We
yeah.
salute them as we should.
Right,
They're
right.
doing their duty, just as we've asked them to. My just fervent wish is give them something honorable to do.
Right,
They're
right.
going to do it.
Right.
Don't
right.
just do what they did to me,
Right,
and
right.
just don't go for whatever, you know.
Right, right.
And we have the glowing mistake of Iraq, you know.
Right, right.
Flaming right in front of our eyes,
Right.
that we're going to always pay the price for. So,
Right, right.
so that's we'll catch up with you if you live long enough to have to contemplate it all. But all that being said, okay, can you see I live in a great place? Great friend. You
The
know,
story turned out
you and
well.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I feel to you, Jim, like I do so many people. It's one of those, you know, hey, we're friendly to each other and everything else. But it's only you know, this much of it that hey, in the future they can get to know you better, watch your kids grow up, everything. It's, you know, life is good.
Right,
So,
right.
So hey, I'm happy and proud to be an American.
And I want to thank
Thank you for taking the time to be interviewed.
Uh-huh.
And I should say that I interviewed you about 8 or 9 years ago, and you
that long ago?
you graciously agreed to be interviewed again. And I think the first time I interviewed you, I didn't know that much about the Vietnam War, and now that I've taught the Vietnam War course 3 times, it's happy to talk to you again when I can ask more specific and I hope better questions. So thank you again for your time, and we'll talk to you later.
You're welcome, Jim. Thanks.
Bye.